My name is Dr. Michael Izard Carroll, and I'm the Director of Public Affairs with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, Omaha District. We'd like to thank the members of the media for joining us today in person. For media outlets who have joined us on the phone, you'll have an opportunity to ask your questions toward the end of the panel session. We'd also like to welcome our guests from the public who have joined us on Facebook for the virtual town hall. We welcome your questions, and we have a team of subject matter experts who are ready to respond to you. I know some of you may have questions regarding water releases in our dams. Those questions will not be part of our discussion today, as they are handled by the USACE Northwestern Division, who will be holding public meetings from April 6th through April 14th. Should you have questions pertaining to dam releases, please see me after the event, and I'll put you in touch with Eileen Williamson, Deputy Director of Public Affairs for Northwestern Division. Some of you may have questions regarding the coronavirus outbreak. Again, our focus today is on levee restoration. To date, Omaha District has not had significant requests for assistance in any operations related to the coronavirus, but be assured, we are always willing to assist when called upon. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few ground rules and then I'll introduce the panelists. For the media, just please remain in your designated media areas, sectioned off by tape, and please respect the space of your colleagues and allow for fair access of coverage. Please do not block the USACE video camera as it's live streaming on Facebook. If you could, please stand and state your name and affiliation before asking a question. And I'd just like to say thank you. And now I'll introduce the panelists. We have Colonel John Hudson, Commander of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, Omaha District, if you'd like to wave. Okay. And we have Mr. Ted Streckfus, Deputy Program Manager for the Omaha District. And then we have Mr. Matt Kraske, Readiness Branch Chief. And Mr. Brett Budd, Chief of our Systems Response Team. Each of the panelists are with the Omaha District. Bios are included in your media kit. Now I'd like to invite Colonel Hudson to say a few remarks.
Okay, well.
Are we live with that, sir?
Well, good afternoon. I'm Colonel John Hudson, as Mike said, and I'm Commander of the Omaha District. And I want to thank everybody for joining us here today, both the media and those who are joining us online using Facebook for a virtual town hall. Thanks to the mild winter that we all experienced here in the central Missouri River Basin, we've been able to make great progress on the levee restoration thus far. And as of 1 March, our target goal of having the main stem levee systems restored to their full authorized elevation has been reached. However, that doesn't mean our job is done, and we still have significant work to do to fully restore the levee systems. In addition, there are several levee systems on the Missouri River that have not been fully restored. However, the 5 major ones have been. So the Corps of Engineers, our priority remains life safety, and it has been our priority now for over 2 years, since March of 2018. During high water years, flood control is the top priority in how we operate the system, and in drought years, we focus on water supply and navigation. Obviously, over the last decade, we've had a lot more wet years than dry years, so much of our effort has been focused on flood control. Now, we are aware that folks within the Missouri River Basin, both on the tributaries and the main stem of the Missouri River, were greatly impacted last year by the floods and are still struggling to recover in many locations. We're doing every effort we can to assist them in that, and by closing the levees to their full authorized level, we have gone a long way to at least enabling the agricultural communities in there to have better insurance rates for this upcoming season. So we have closed 24 breaches on 5 separate levee systems along the main stem of the river over the last year, and we've been funded at over $400 million to execute that. To date, we've had 35 contracts awarded, and 24 of which have been completed. It's been an enormous task, as we have moved over 4.73 million cubic yards of sand. That's enough to equal 2 Empire State Buildings, and over 1.1 million cubic yards of clay to restore the levees thus far. Now, as I mentioned before, the levees aren't fully restored because we still have to get grass to grow on the levees here as spring comes upon us, we'll get some good grass established. In addition, there's a lot of work with seepage berms and relief wells that still needs to be done, as well as restoring the bank on the riverside of the levees. So we are working closely with the state of Iowa, Nebraska, Missouri, and Kansas on some short-term studies that will address specific flood risk management needs, and are pursuing a long-term study for more comprehensive flood risk management strategies to measure and measures within the region. So USACE has worked closely with the states and local partners. We've submitted a request to start this comprehensive Lower Missouri River Basin flood risk management feasibility study here later this FY. So with that, I'd like to open the floor to questions to the media representatives here and those who have called in.
Yeah, so I don't have any typing in
Okay, I hear somebody on the phone. Do you have a question?
Okay, well, if there's no one on the phone, perhaps we can look at some of the questions that may come online. Let's see here. Not too much just yet. We can wait a few minutes, but perhaps one of the gentlemen in the panel could talk about some of the contracts that might be coming up, what we have going on in the next few months.
Good. I'm Brett Budd. I'm the chief of the systems restoration team. We have quite a few contracts yet to come. Just today, we advertised the Union Dyke by Valley, Nebraska. That's going out for proposal to our pre-qualified sources list. Bid openings at the end of this month. We'll also have contracts coming up for a variety of contracts along the Platte River and the Elkhorn River in Nebraska. Project in Sioux Falls in Sheridan, Wyoming.
Okay, I know the discussion isn't about the coronavirus, but would the current news cycle have any effect on any of the contracts that would be coming down the pike?
We don't anticipate it. Right now, all of our workers, most of the work is in rural areas along Missouri, Iowa, and Nebraska. We have not had any reports of the coronavirus impacting any of our workers or what we're able to accomplish on the job site.
In addition to that, within the headquarters here, we've been doing a lot of telework, and we have telework plans in place for those who are still in the building, should it be necessary ultimately to reduce the number of workforce here actually at the headquarters building, so we expect to be able to fully continue to execute our mission.
Are there any restrictions, or are there any, let's see here, in terms of money spent, have all the funds been executed, or do you have all the funds that you need to continue on with the projects you have in place?
Yes, thus far we've secured over $400 million to execute the work, and while we still believe we'll need a few hundred million more than that before it's done, at this point we have received all the funding we have needed for all of the contracts that we have either awarded or currently plan to award.
Okay. We have a question from the media over here.
Yeah, Ryan Matheny with KMA Radio. Can someone explain when you call people hear breach closure versus a levee being repaired back to its pre-flood height? Can you explain kind of the differences there?
Yes. So our levee system was devastated obviously by the March flood events, and that created a lot of damage along the entire over 340 miles of levees on the main stem of the Missouri. And some of those were breaches, and when we say breach, that's a breach that takes it all the way down to ground level. So if you have a 15-foot high levee, it's all the way down to the base of the levee. And in most cases, those breaches, you get a big scour hole develops that takes it even well below that, 30, 40 feet deep scour holes. And then there's two types of those breaches. There's what we refer to as the inlet breach, which is when the water goes from the riverside through the levee to the landward side. And then we have outlet breaches, which is where the water goes from the landward side back to the river. Typically, the inlet breaches happen on the northern end of the levee systems, and the outlet breaches is at the southern tip of the levee systems. We were able to close all of our inlet breaches by November, December timeframe, and then once the river dropped to a lower level, we were able to then start repairing the outlet breaches. We weren't able to start repairing outlet breaches until the river was down because we wanted all the inundated areas on the landward side of the levee to drain to the greatest extent they can before those repairs started. So we started the outlet breach repairs in earnest in the December timeframe, and throughout January and February, we were working at a rate of about $1.5 million a day in placement of clay and sand to close those levee breaches.
I'll add to that. We were very lucky and fortunate that the fact that this winter was relatively mild, that allowed us to be able to work long hours, a lot of work that went into providing these levee closures, and as a result of that, we've been successful in reaching one of our goals, which was being able to close the vast majority of the breaches in the system by the 1 March timeline. We have one levee system all the way to our southern border that we're continuing to work. The contract is currently advertised.
In total, we've worked well over 1.1 million hours of labor on the levee systems, and that includes the tributary levee repairs as well.
All right, let's see if we have any other questions online. Well, no questions at the moment. We still have some time here. Do you have any?
Let me address one of the other issues that's oftentimes raised is, hey, the Corps doesn't have any priorities. Because Congress says you have 8 priorities. Well, that's not accurate. We don't have 8 priorities. We have 8 project purposes that were authorized by Congress for our 6 dams on the Missouri system. Those 8 purposes are not 8 priorities. The priority is always life safety, and that means in a wet year, that means dealing with floods and reducing the flood risk, and in dry years, that life safety purpose translates into how do we manage water supply to ensure all of the municipalities and businesses and communities along the river are able to have sufficient water to meet their needs. So, for instance, in Omaha, there's a major intake that's up by Missouri, by the Mormon Bridge, and if we don't have a certain elevation of water in the river during a drought year, then their intake could go dry. So we manage that in drought years, and then as I mentioned before, since March of 2018, now 2 years ago, we've been managing for flood control because of the high flows that we've seen throughout the river system due to higher than average precipitation throughout the basin.
Can we talk a little bit about the 8499 program? Some levees that are part of the program, maybe someone could explain the difference to the public so they know why some levees are being repaired and some are not.
So Matt Kraske, Readiness Branch Chief here at the Omaha District. So in the 8499 program, there are federal and non-federal levees. And what that refers to is if a levee was constructed by the Corps of Engineers, that is a federal levee. The non-federal levees are typically constructed by a private sponsor and then brought into the program after we inspect them. The difference is when you do a rehabilitation, the federal levees are 100% federal cost shared, and the private levees or the non-federal levees are 80-20 cost share. I think what Dr. Carroll is referring to is we also have some active and inactive levees in our PL 8499 program. And if a levee system is inactive in the program, that levee system is not eligible for rehabilitation assistance. So there are several levees on the right bank of the Missouri River in Nebraska that are inactive in the program and therefore not eligible for federal assistance for the rehabilitation. We're still providing technical assistance to the levee sponsors and working with the levee sponsors to get those, to help the sponsors do the repairs and get those levees back into our system and get them back in an active status so that they can provide the protection that they were designed for originally.
And I'd supplement, in addition to the levee systems on the right bank, there was one levee system on the left bank of the Missouri River that was also in an inactive status during this past flood event.
All right, so I have another question. This has come up from multiple media who have contacted our office, so not specifically for today, but perhaps you could describe, since we're a year since the bomb cyclone of 2019, around March this time, what would you say would be the major difference between this particular incident and, say, 2011?
So the two flood events were very different in terms of both the cause as well as how they manifest themselves in terms of damage within the system. The 2011 flood was primarily driven by a significant snowpack up in the upper end of the basin in Montana and North Dakota, coupled with a massive snowpack in the northern Rockies. And as that came off, it exceeded the capacity of the reservoir system to completely handle it. And we're a reservoir-driven system, and so the amount of snow and water that come in the system between the months of March and December each year, we need to get that all the way through the system by December 15th. And so that caused the flow within the river to be extremely high for a lengthy period of time. So that put pressure on the levees in the lower part of the basin, where the water was high on the levees but not overtopping the levees for an extended period of time, which caused seepage underneath the foundation of the levee, and then the levees yielded as the foundation of the levees gave way. The event in 2019 was very different because it was due to a rapid runoff in the middle portion of the basin due to a very rapid snowmelt and rain event, the bomb cyclone, that caused all of the snowpack in eastern Nebraska, western edge of Iowa, and southeastern South Dakota to essentially melt in about a 72-hour window and surge into the system and overwhelm the height of the levees. So the levees were overtopped for about 4 days with the flows that greatly exceeded the carrying capacity of the river. And then the overtopping of the levee caused the levees to erode and eventually fail. So the failure mechanism in 2011 was due to underseepage and the foundation of the levees, resulting in the levees collapsing. We only had 5 breaches that year. And then in 2019, it was because the levees were overtopped for about 4 days, and during that, all that flow of the water over the top of the levees caused the erosion, typically on the landward side of the levee, and eventually the levees yielded and resulted in 52 breaches in the system, and also extensive damage on the rest of the levees, which didn't breach but just had significant erosion damage.
If I could just make sure you get real close to the mic.
Yep. In addition, within 2011, it's one of the finer points, probably kind of a rabbit hole that really doesn't matter, but in addition to the well above average snowpack in the mountains, there was also a pretty dramatic rainfall event that covered all parts of 3 states up in the Wyoming, Montana, North Dakota area that dropped basically a year's worth of rain over a very short window of time.
So it's important to note, every flood event is different and driven by different factors. The 1993 flood was different. The other floods we had earlier last century, all of them were different and manifested themselves in different ways, whether that's significant rain, significant snow, series of rain, of events back to back to back, all of them manifested themselves differently. And that's the nature of a large basin like we see in Missouri River.
Here we have a question online. What projects would take priority in case of a cutback on workers on the ground due to COVID-19?
Let me take a shot at it.
Go ahead.
I think it's a great question, but very fortunately, we're in a position that we currently do not see an impact related to the COVID-19 influenza virus. We are fortunate in that the actions that we have contracted with industry in order to provide those repairs are all moving forward. So there's not necessarily a prioritization associated with them. There may be individual setbacks as, you know, if this influenza outbreak continues to expand, perhaps there may be individual challenges within the staffs of those individuals that impacts forward movement. But right now, we don't see a prioritization required on the basis of the work.
And you know, each project has different teams working it, different contractors working it. So it's going to be largely driven by, you know, the specific group. The other thing, I wouldn't expect, you know, the work that goes on there's not a lot of, it's not like they're all in one big room working together, right? They're individuals sitting on individual pieces of equipment, walking around, working project sites. There's probably, you know, with some good discipline out there, washing hands and stuff, which should be pretty manageable out in those projects.
Let me just add too, the stuff we have currently under construction contracts, each construction contractor is required to meet a completion date. So if they were impacted, and lost personnel, there'd be a requirement on a construction contractor to get additional personnel to make up for the losses. But like I said, we've got hundreds of miles of levees being repaired right now. They're very widespread. I would be greatly surprised if we're impacted by the coronavirus on those individual crews, with people running the pieces of equipment on the job site. Okay.
Okay, I have another question online. Hi, this is Luke Victor with ABC 17 KMIZ in Columbia, Missouri. Did the failure of the levees due to the bomb cyclone have a domino effect downstream in central Missouri? If we avoid a major storm system like that this year, would that mean we don't see flooding as severe as 2019?
Well, certainly, we had an event which surged more water in the system than the system had the capacity to handle. And the way that event played out with the rapid melt simultaneously across a large section of the basin, it did have a domino effect going down the entire system, but last year also had a second flood event. Was it May when we had the second event?
Yes,
that really impacted the lower part of the basin across Missouri and overwhelmed a lot of that system, which had survived the first flood event in March. So there are at times domino effects like that. Fortunately, this year is not lining up like last year in terms of we don't have significant snowpack left on the plains. There's still some in eastern North and South Dakota, which we're monitoring very closely. And the weather systems have been relatively dry the last few months, which is hopefully enabling our saturated soils to begin to dry out some, which will, over the next few months, if we remain in a dry cycle, significantly reduce the risk. But we're several months from being clear of any risk of flooding, because one or two major weather events can change the equation significantly in the basin.
And this is Ted Strack. Listen, again, I would boot stomp that. We can't foresee the precipitation events that will be coming our direction. The ground conditions, especially in North and South Dakota, are very saturated, which exacerbates runoff. So as a result of that, we must remain very cautious. Certainly we do look forward towards drying conditions that will benefit, but at this point we're still at an elevated risk.
And the snowpack in the northern Rockies and central Rockies is average to slightly above average, but it's within the normal range that we'd see. Now there's still another month when there'll likely be accumulating snow in the mountains, so we can't say for sure where we'll end up there, but right now we're on a average trajectory for the mountains, which is generally good news. But with the levee system, even though it's at full height, it remains vulnerable. If we have extended periods of time with water on those levees without well-established grass, there's increased risk. In addition, these levees haven't yet been loaded with water, so there's always risk prior to the first time they're loaded as well.
Just a question for the team here. Given the scenario, you have a lot of questions coming in regarding how's the weather, what weather might be, how might affect the process. What would you recommend to the public that they do to prepare personally in this scenario?
Well, certainly if you live in or near the floodplain, you should always have an emergency evacuation plan in place, and you need to be staying in contact with your local emergency management officials. So for instance, right now in Nebraska on the Elkhorn Loop and Platte River, there's no snowpack existing. The ground has already started to melt. In many cases, the frost is already gone, but that doesn't mean we're not at risk of flooding. It just takes one major weather event to all of a sudden reintroduce the risk. Now, we're not primed like we were last year for a flood event on the tributaries in Nebraska, but it could still happen if the wrong type of, if another bomb cyclone type event comes. So that's why it's important to always have a plan in place for you as a family at the personal level, and then also keep in contact with your local county emergency management officials to know what the conditions are in the area. In addition, you can go online. The National Weather Service provides river forecasting where they forecast potential river levels as well, and that's all readily available for the public to look at and keep track of.
And from a common sense perspective, and we heard Governor Ricketts talk about this on Monday of this week, if there's flow, don't go. So if you're on a road and there happens to be water flowing over the road from a flood event, go a different route. Do not attempt to pass that flooded area.
And with most of the fatalities from last March event was people getting into the flow of a river or across the road.
All right, I just want to open up the floor to anyone on the phone. If there's any media on the phone who'd like to ask a question. And just as a reminder, if I didn't mention it before, I do apologize. We do have the National Weather Service on the line as well, who can answer some questions for you. All right, nothing heard. I'm going to have another question from online here. Do you guys have any plans to at any point use trucks from levee repair to assist with flood relief when that takes place?
Read that one more.
Do you guys have any plans at any point to use trucks from levee repair to assist with flood relief when that takes place?
So if there were another flood event and if they needed equipment, we contractually cannot use the equipment that we're doing the rehabilitation projects with for legal reasons. They might be able to be pulled off and contracted by a local entity for a short time, but then that would have to go through our contracting folks and through Brett's team to make sure that we weren't violating a contract according to time somewhere there too. But so contractually, we would not legally be able to use those trucks for that purpose.
I also supplement, in the event we received a mission assignment, oftentimes from FEMA, we would have the opportunity to use, we can very quickly mobilize an additional fleet of truck or those types of vehicles in order to provide the type of support you're looking for.
So just on the levee repairs, much of the equipment that's being used for the levee repairs are really farm tractors with scraper pans and dozers. So they're not necessarily the same equipment you would use in a flood relief scenario, although it could be depending on the scenario. It's also important to point out that about 75% of the equipment out there that's operating on restoration of the levees along the main stem of the Missouri are actually from the local farm community. There's farmers who farm that land on the landward side of the levee who are out there this year, instead of working their crops, they've been working on the levee. So we've been able to put a large number of them to work with that, and they're out there with their tractors and their scraper pans doing an amazing job at getting these levees restored.
Just a general question for the panel. What do you think some of the misconceptions the public might have about the work that we do with the Corps of Engineers?
I think there's a lot of misconception about what our priorities are. As I've already mentioned before, our priorities is for life safety, And that either in the case of wet years revolves around flood control and dry years around drought. Other project purposes such as hydropower, recreation, the water quality and environmental stewardship, all of those have the secondary benefit of however we operate the river. Those do not drive our decisions. So we do not increase or decrease releases out of the main stem dams to increase or decrease our power to meet some objective within hydropower production. They get the water they get based on whether we're operating under dry conditions or wet conditions. In addition, we do not operate the system any differently because of the endangered species along the system. While we do have natural resource areas where we've done work to encourage the birds and the pallid sturgeon development in those areas, that does not influence how we operate the flows within the system.
Good answer. One of the misconceptions that we have with our levee program that the public always addresses to us is they assume that the levees are owned and operated by the Corps of Engineers and that we maintain them. But in fact, the Corps does not own any of the levees that we're working on. They're owned by levee sponsors, which are drainage districts, levee districts, and sometimes municipalities. They own the levees, they're responsible for the maintenance of the levee system. And if they're in the PL 8499 program and active in the program, once a flood happens, they request assistance in rehabbing the levee to repair it back to the condition it was prior to the flood. So one of the questions that was just posed to me yesterday when I was talking to a group was, what's the Corps going to do after the flood is done, we're done with repairs? Are you going to do a better job of maintaining the levee systems? And at that point I remind them, once we turn it over to the levee sponsor, the Corps is done with it, we do annual inspections on the levees. But it's the responsibility of the levee sponsors that actually own the levee systems to maintain it going forward after the repairs are complete.
Let me build on that, because the failure in the levees was not due to poor maintenance of the levees. By and large, the levee sponsors have done a decent job of maintaining the levees. They kept good, healthy grass on there. But it was the sheer volume of water that went through the system. In no time in the existence of this system, which was built during the 60s largely, could it have handled the type of flows that we saw here in March of last year, where in excess of 400,000 cubic feet per second of water flowed down the system from the confluence of the Platte Missouri River south. You had far more water than that system could ever have handled, and you would have had overtopping of the levees at any point since they were built under those conditions. But the levee sponsors, by and large, did a decent job maintaining the levees, and that was not the cause of the failure. It was the extended overtopping of the levees that caused them to fail. Yeah, it's also important to point out that all that flow that came in on the Platte and the Missouri River, down the Big Sioux River, James River, was all unregulated flows. In other words, there was no dams on any of those tributaries that enabled us to influence the flows on the main stem of the Missouri River. And the flows out of Gavin's Point at the peak was 100,000 cubic feet per second. And that high flow only was for, I think it was about 8 hours. By the time it reached Omaha, the levee system south of Omaha had already been devastated due to the extensive flows that came down the Platte River at over 250,000 cubic feet per second. So while those high flows did influence the system on the backside of the flooding, it was not the proximate cause of the levees failing. They had already failed before the high flows out of Gavin's Point ever reached the Omaha area south.
Okay, we have another question online.
One last point, one factoid that's kind of interesting that is oftentimes overlooked is because we do have 6 dams on the main stem of the Missouri River, we were able to terminate flow from Fort Randall Dam upstream of Gavin's Point during the peak of the flooding event. So in essence, the flow in the Missouri River below Fort Randall Dam was 0. And we did that in order to attempt to mitigate or minimize the overarching impact of the flood that was occurring downstream of that point. Go ahead.
Thanks, Ted. Can you define what percentage of strength the levees are at in their current full height but incomplete status? I'm just wondering about their ability to withstand water against them if that occurs here in Fremont County. Iowa against this year? Again this year.
I'm not sure we can really put a percentage strength on it, because it depends on many factors. How long is the water up against the levee? Is there, what kind of flow of water goes against the levee? But certainly extended periods of water against the levees without the grass on there and without more work with the seepage berms increases risk. In addition, if they started to get overtopped, they would erode more quickly without grass. But with the full height being there, that offers a level of protection that obviously wouldn't be there if we weren't at full height, and we continue to aggressively work to restore them. And should we anticipate a high flow event based on the National Weather Service river forecast, we would do additional emergency measures to help improve their survivability, as we did during much of the flow last fall in the September timeframe, as we had partial repairs to the inlet breaches. In order to hold those repairs in place, we put a lot of rock on the river side of the levees. We put other structures to help direct the water away from the levees to increase their survivability. So I'm not sure I can put in, I can't put any percentage against it, because there's too many variables that influence the survivability of a levee.
I can answer to that. So all the major levee systems along the left bank of the Missouri River, until the levees are fully repaired, we're going to have active construction crews working on the levee system. So if a flood event were to happen, we were able to quickly change what we're doing, prioritize, and do the most critical things to keep that levee system intact and in place. During September, we had high flows. We would change our methods of construction and make changes within a day as needed to overcome what we were seeing with the high water events that we had in September. Then we also had a high water event in December. And again, with our crews being on site, we were able to react very quickly to the conditions on site and address any issues that come up. So while the levees are incomplete, we're in a very good place to react to any conditions on the job site, as they come up.
Speaking of the job site, could you give us an idea, give some perspective to the public, because a lot of people can't actually reach these locations, so they don't know when you say, some people aren't actually directly on the levee, they don't necessarily have property there, but could you give an idea of what maybe the day looks like for the contractors, weather conditions, how many hours are they working, things like that?
So if you're in the public, you're curious about the construction of the levees, please check our website. Don't go on the levee system. Those are active construction projects. The levee projects, basically it's a strip of land along the rivers. There's limited access. We have dozens, in some cases hundreds of pieces of equipment actively working on the construction site. Through the winter months, trying to get the levee systems closed and meet the March 1st mandate that the contractor or the commander put on us to try to get the levee systems closed. We were working 24/7 on all the major levee systems. Now that we've got it up to full height, we're starting to back off. It's in working from sun up to sundown, and we'll be working out there full time as long as the sun's up until the levee systems are complete. But it's very active. We're taking a lot of borrow from farmers' fields and placing it on the construction site as we move forward in construction and get the levees completed. One of the last things we'll be doing is putting new surfacing on top of the levees, topsoil, and then riprap along the edges of the levees. So you're going to see more trucks coming in on the interstate systems and the state highways and in the levee systems with rock to finish up construction on the levees.
Just want to check the phone line one more time. Do you have anyone else on the phone? Okay, nothing heard. Could you provide some information about how the Corps of Engineers has worked on their relationship with both elected officials, local government, state government, other federal agencies?
Sure. Well, we communicate regularly with state and local officials. I personally meet with most of the congressional delegations in Iowa and Nebraska on a somewhat regular basis and keep them in direct communication with them as the situation warrants. In addition to that, I met with both the governors of Iowa and Nebraska individually to discuss the levee system at length and where the repairs are to keep them well informed. we periodically host conference calls where the congressional delegations are invited to call in to give them periodic updates, and then we provide written correspondence to them as well. And then Matt, if you could talk about the recent trip you took earlier this week going to meet different emergency management agencies across the region.
Yes, sir. So Matt Kraske, Readiness Branch Chief here in the Omaha District. So annually, actually we do two things annually. We every spring we have flood fight training for our local levee sponsors. We invite the county emergency managers and the local folks around, and we give flood fight training for that deals with levee surveillance and then emergency repairs that may need to be made. And then another thing we do is we take a week every spring and we travel to the 7 states within our district, and we meet with the state emergency management agencies. We meet with tribal officials, and we also meet with some county officials that the state brings in. We just recently completed that trip. Matter of fact, we got done with that last night. We traveled to Colorado, Wyoming, a couple places in Montana, North Dakota, South Dakota. We met with some folks in Iowa. Yesterday, we do that in conjunction with FEMA Region 8, which is out of Colorado. So we also coordinate with our other federal partners. And again, annually we do that, and it's a good trip. We get a lot of communication and collaboration through the state agencies on that trip every year.
We have another question online. What kind of timeline are you looking at for full-strength levees?
The majority of the repairs, especially on the tributaries, we should be complete this calendar year. We do anticipate, especially with levee 536, which is our southernmost levee system, they just advertised this week. Those would go into 2021, but the bulk of the repairs we're anticipating should be complete by the end of this calendar year. As a matter of fact, if I can add on it, some of the projects that we've completed so far in Nebraska are Pender, Cedar Creek, Broken Bow, Scribner, Columbus. In 2 major levee systems in Nebraska, our 616, 613, which is a levee that provides flood risk reduction for Offutt Air Force Base, and levee system R613, which is in Bellevue, just south of the Papio River and goes to the Platte River. Those projects are completed. Currently we have projects going on in Western Sarpy, which is almost done. Omaha Right Bank, L561 Nish, which is near Hamburg, Iowa. Clear Creek, Salt Creek levee projects, this is in Lincoln. The Papio Creek system, which is in Metro Omaha. Ames Dike, and all the projects on the left bank of the Missouri River.
Just another question to talk about some of the stuff that we've gotten in public affairs. People want to know, why can't you just, if there's a levee height now, it seems pretty straightforward, let's just raise it. What prevents the Corps of Engineers from just raising the levee height?
Yeah, so a couple things with that. One, Congress, when we built the various levee systems, approved each levee system to a certain elevation. When that elevation was determined, they did a lot of hydraulic modeling and studying to determine what an appropriate height was of that levee system based on the known data of river flow at the time. And to go in and just raise one levee in one location could potentially create additional risk at another location in the system. So to protect one community, one group, you may actually increase the risk of another group. In addition to that, just raising the levee, you may have structural challenges with doing that because of underseepage. There's only so high you can build these levees given the ground conditions within the basin, so that can limit height raising. And ultimately, these are the questions, though, that we're going to get after in this Lower Missouri River Basin study, is how we can improve the capacity of the system to handle high flows beyond its existing capacity at authorized levels. And that's not necessarily by raising a levee, though in some places it could be raising a levee. It could also mean realigning a levee, in other words, opening up the space on the riverside of the levee for more water to flow. It means potentially designing floodways within the levee system, better floodplain management on the landward side of the levees, better internal drainage. on the landward side of the levee. Local communities can change their zoning ordinances for the landward side of the levee to reduce risk. So there's many factors that are involved with improving the system beyond just raising the levees. So, yeah. Ultimately, that is to have a more resilient system.
Okay, just checking the phone lines. Do we have anyone on the phone who'd like to ask any questions? Okay, well, we do have a media in the audience. Go ahead.
I'm wondering about the tributaries and the unregulated flow. Would that be included in that study, and what kinds of things could be done on some of those rivers as well?
So the potential flows that come down will be part of the flow frequency study, because that's all part of the basin. Now, as far as specific projects on tributaries, those would be separate follow-on studies. Now, we do have a study going on right now in the Papio, which had been authorized even before the event, that we're doing, which is looking at some of the flows on that system. And also the Lower Platte has a potential study moving forward to look at additional measures that could be taken on the Platte River. So those would be separate studies from the main one, but what flows down those rivers influences the Lower Missouri River Basin study.
I'd add to that, as you also look towards this lower basin study that the commander previously alluded to, those are the types of considerations that are going to be part of that scoping effort. There may be a picture that is drawn that comes out of this study that points to the possibility for additional control provided on some of these tributaries. Then you have to look towards the second and third order effects, whether or not it's economically feasible, whether it's justified, what are the impacts to the local landowners, that type of thing, as to whether or not any of those recommendations out of this lower basin study would ultimately be implemented by Congress.
Do you have any follow-up questions? Okay. Well, I'm going to take this time, if no one has any other questions online or on the phone, we'll go ahead and conclude, but I just wanted to ask the panel, having worked on this project the past year, what would you say the impact for you and your team has been, and if you could just give a little bit of insight to the public about what it means to you to be working on this on behalf of the Corps of Engineers.
We'll start with Brad. I'll
So, leaving the systems restoration team, it has been unbelievable. The camaraderie, the teamwork, the dedication of the Corps employees. Currently, we have 150 Corps employees actively working on flood repairs. Overall, we've had 260 different employees throughout the Corps from the Omaha District and other districts that have come and helped us out. We have folks from the Chicago District, Portland District, Walla Walla District, Little Rock District, a lot of other districts that it's an almost endless list. But everybody's been extremely dedicated through most of the events, through the holidays. We work in 6 and 7 days a week, long hours. I've never seen a more dedicated group of folks than I have through this last flood event. And then that continues on to the levee sponsors and our construction contractors. Everybody that's doing this work and has touched on what we're doing with trying to repair the levees and putting people's lives kind of back in place, have been working extremely well together, and they know the importance of what we're doing. And I've been extremely blessed and pleased to have an opportunity to be a part of this. I've never seen anything like it before. Pray to God we never see anything like it again. But it's been truly a great experience.
So I'll just echo some of what Brett said. We started this back a year ago, and my little readiness branch of 5 people grew into several hundred people that we used. We supplemented from across the Corps of Engineers, and the dedication of those folks that we brought in to help us out internally was something pretty phenomenal to see. And then again, with the levee sponsors, and then with all the outreach we've been doing, I believe that it has given us a good opportunity to reach out and tell our story a little bit more, and to iterate that we are here to help the public when there is a need, and we can put a team together to do that and execute that mission in a timely manner. And it's just, and again, it has been a unique situation. I won't say it has been fun. It has been extremely challenging, but it's a great opportunity. It's a great opportunity for me personally, and then also to reach out and just see, that we can help the communities in a positive manner.
Yeah, this is Ted Strakis, and I appreciate the question, Mike. Fundamentally, first and foremost, I want to recognize, the hardship and the tragedy that have befallen many within this Missouri River Basin as a result of this record type event. Records come and records go. Many of us here on the table here have lived through the flood of 11, and we were thankful that was never going to have to repeat, right, until 2019 came along. First and foremost, recognizing that the hardship and the impact of those citizens and the communities and the ag community that's been negatively impacted by the flood has been very hard and very difficult. For me personally, as I look at the staff that we've had engaged, many of those staff were personally and negatively impacted by the flood waters. Many of the people were here working to try to help save others along the Missouri River while their homes were being flooded and damaged and destroyed. To me, it is absolutely heartrending to have seen the devastation wrought by the flood, yet at the same time we were given an impossible task to begin this process of rehabilitation of this levee system, and thankfully we were blessed with an open winter that allowed us to be very aggressive with respect to our posture, and we had people step into the breach and be successful doing something that many said would be impossible to accomplish. I had many people talk to me about it's going to be a minimum of a 2-year effort to even get the breaches closed. So for the people that we had engaged, for the communities that we've had extensive conversations with and talking about how we could be part of their team in order to return them to some sense of normalcy, I am just very blessed and gratified to have been involved with a team of teams that was successful in being some small part of that recovery effort.
Well, throughout the last year, I've been incredibly impressed not only with our own team, which in excess of 200 individuals in the district now, currently a little over 150, who are dedicating not just the regular work week, but almost every weekend since last year. They've been hard at work. And in fact, during the holidays, we even had to force some of them to take some leave, to take a few days off with their families. So it's been incredible dedication for the district team. But I've also been incredibly impressed with the local communities and particularly the levee sponsors. And after we got through the initial shock of the event, their ability to step up shoulder to shoulder, work with us to come up with solutions, dealing with land easements, make sure we had good sources of material, and many of them personally working on the equipment to restore the levees. It was incredible to see them step in a plate and get a chance to work with them. A lot of local leaders, the Mayor of Hamburg, working with her, and the congressional delegations who are completely dedicated and determined to get the resources to the communities that need it along the river, help us get the funding. Funding has never been an issue as we've been doing this levee restoration, thanks to the hard work from both at the state and federal level from those officials. But it's been a team effort, both inside the district and external to the district, to get us to where we are today with a largely closed levee system and well positioned as this spring flows start on the river system.
Thank you, Colonel Hudson. This just about concludes our event. I just want to thank everyone for participating, members of the media, and also our friends and family online. Thank you for coming in and asking your questions. Just to let you know that we're always available to answer your questions by email. You can contact us at omaha.usace pa@usates.army.mil. And as mentioned, we have a great source for you for information, live and information we update it every 2 weeks, if not more, and that's on our webpage. That's at www.nwo.usates.army.mil. And certainly please follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and thank you very much for being here today.